First off, I want to apologize for the senators. They're currently voting on the floor on bills, so they won't be here unless something changes in the next couple of minutes and they can find a way to break away. Richard Volt, House Minority Leader. With me is Ed Orcutt, my transportation lead for the House Republicans, and also Joe Schmick, my healthcare lead for the House Republicans. So today we're going to focus on a couple things. Obviously, Medicare reimbursements and transportation. I need some Medicare right now. I'm kind of sick myself, so sorry about that. At 12:30, we're going to see an announcement of a 10% gas tax increase from the Democrats in Washington State in the House. It is not necessarily, I think, a package that's good for Washington right now. It's ironic to me that the very same people that lambasted all the energy industry for raising prices have doubled the price of the gas tax in the last 8 years. After this gas tax increase, it will raise it to 67 cents a gallon in Washington State as a whole. That includes federal. And it is hard on working families. If you think about a gas tax and what it means to the citizens of Washington State, it is a tax, it's a user fee, it's something that you can't get away from. And what we've done in rural areas, and especially rural Washington, this hurts the underemployed and the unemployed the most. When you look at work in Washington now, a lot of people, around 40% of rural communities are commuting, at least in my district from what we did in a survey, are commuting out of their community, out of their counties to other counties for work. So if you think about putting somebody on the road every day, if you want to change the dynamic in Washington State, you can't look at the symptoms all the time. You kind of have to look at the cause of congestion. We had a thing called the Growth Management Act several years ago that wanted to move 80% of the population, 20% of the land mass. That was the goal. What it eventually did was move 80% of the jobs to 20% of the land mass. And so now we're commuting those people into those jobs and creating more and more congestion every day. If you want congestion relief, we believe that there's other steps that we can take in Washington State to help with congestion that don't cost us 67 cents a gallon to get it done. We also look at the inefficiencies in our transportation system, and it is probably, in my opinion, not an effectual use of our money until we understand how to build a bridge that will float and a ferry that will float and other road projects on time and on budget. And we have to build projects that are right-sized and not just spread projects around to get votes for a gas tax. We have to do what's best for the citizens of Washington State. With that note, I'll give it to Ed.
Okay, well, he's pretty well covered. There's not a lot that needs to be added. My feeling is very similar to Representative DeBolt's, that we need to get our people working again. We've heard, you know, in the Finance Committee and in the Transportation Committee, when the governor proposed her hazardous substance tax, that would be a stable funding source because gasoline is a non-discretionary item. So this is a tax that would hit people. It's something they couldn't avoid. And at a time when we've got people that are struggling to survive, we've got high unemployment, especially in our rural areas, it's something they just can't afford. We're not done with the foreclosure concerns in our state. And adding more tax on their driving is just going to make it that much tougher for them to feed their families and to keep a roof over their heads. What we feel that needs to be done is we need to reduce the cost of our transportation projects. We just had a work session in the House Transportation Committee on Monday, and we were given testimony that our transportation projects always cost more than comparable projects in other states. And what we need to be doing, instead of passing more taxes right now, is spending the next 2 years drilling down and figuring out exactly how we're that much more different, how much more expensive than these other states, and fix those problems.
You had some examples for me the other day. Do you have
well, some examples of things that we can do. Programmatic permitting. That was something that was approved and I think went off the books in 2006. What we heard was that saved time on permitting and costs on permitting.
Oh, you mentioned the price of a bridge in Washington versus other states?
Yeah, there were some of the testimony that we heard was that we're 1.5 to 2.5 times what projects in comparable areas in other states. So take a bridge project in Washington in an urban area, and you look at comparable bridge projects in urban areas in other states, and in some cases we were 2 or 2.5 times what the cost was in those other states. In fact, one person testified that the Alaska Way Viaduct on the per mile basis is equivalent to Boston's Big Dig in cost. And that should scare every single one of us in this room and in this state. And why we're coming and asking for more money for transportation when we haven't worked out the cost issues that we're already struggling with is beyond me. That's what we should be doing over the next 2 years. Let's deal with the cost of permitting. Let's deal with environmental. Let's go back and look at anything that the legislature has put on for requirements. What is the cost of the apprenticeship requirement? Certainly there are times when contractors will need to use apprentices because they just have a shortage of journeymen. That's not the case right now. Apprenticeship should not be a requirement, especially at this time. What it should be is it should maintain an option. Sales tax. Why are we collecting sales tax? Now, some people will say, well, this is a big concern for the general fund. But on this new tax package, it is not a concern. Because when we do our revenue forecasts through the Revenue Forecast Council, we do it based on current law. This tax package is not current law. So the 6-year budget outlook, the projections that we've made for that, does not factor in any sales tax revenue from this projected tax package. Now is the absolute right time to change that policy and no longer pay sales tax on these. That would be more money that would go for projects.
Bless you.
Bless you.
Thank you. I've been doing that all day. And we'll open up for questions on that. We also wanted to have Joe Schmidt talk a little bit about healthcare.
Well, as you all know, on Friday, we're going to talk about the abortion mandate bill. Basically, that bill does 3 things. It says that if you are going to sell in the private regulated market, here in the state, if you give birth benefits, you're going to have to pay for abortion benefits. There is a clause in there, I'm describing the bill. There's a clause in the bill that says if you have conscientious objections, that's there. There are questions, though, and these questions are based upon an AG opinion that whether or not there's any protections for those conscientious objectors at all. And the third thing that it does is that it will allow out-of-state, because of the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, there is a provision that allows for multi-state offer of coverage to come in and not have to cover abortion inside the exchange, but not outside of the exchange. You want me to go on?
Well, yeah, sure. I think the important thing is to understand that it's a mandate. It doesn't align with Obamacare.
Well, I was just describing what the bill does.
Yeah. So that bill, the reason he brought that up is that bill's going to be moving off the floor on Friday in the House of Representatives. And so we wanted to let you guys have an understanding of it. So do you want to talk about where we're at on this bill?
Well, the question is, why do we need it? And the major carriers already in the state already offer abortion coverage, or they don't offer it, they just do it. They weren't told to do it. They responded to the market and do it anyway. So why do we need the bill? This does put us in direct conflict with the federal legislation, and that has to do with the Hyde-Weldon Amendment, where that amendment says no federal money can be used for abortion. And that does put us in conflict there. And so lots of different rules and regulations are going to have to follow down the pipe here to how we're going to handle that. I guess this is just, when we have so many mandates in our state already, is this going to encourage more companies to come in and want to do business here if it's just another barrier? And I view this as another barrier. And where I live, along, I deal with the border states, Idaho. I have 3 of my counties are right along the county, or the state line. We're losing businesses. And this is just another barrier to insurance companies wanting to come into our state to do business. And we see it all the time. We call it the migration. And the sad part is, it's moving out. They're not coming in. I'll stop.
All right, questions?
Based on what you were describing on transportation, is there any way that the gas taxes get a 2/3 majority required to pass the legislature?
So what we're looking at right now is we want certain reforms met before we can entertain this discussion. One, I think 10 cents is too high. Two, the reason that we're in the position we're in today is that maintenance and operations in our state is not being funded. Because what we've done in the past is we bonded projects for 30 years. The reason we bond them for 30 years is we need to get the votes to get it out, so they go out and get people to support it by giving them projects. We believe, actually, we want to take the politics out of transportation. We want to build 15-year bonds so that way you can use the money as it rolls off for maintenance and preservation, and that you should right-size these projects. Transportation Commission came and met and said we have to right-size projects, and we have to do what, prioritize them. There are certain projects that need to be built and certain that don't, and so that's two. And then we need the efficiency protections, growth management issues that we want faced, and the 9A permits. So if they're willing to sit down and have this negotiation with us, we're willing to sit down and talk to them.
Representative Vorka, does prevailing wage play a role in making the projects too expensive?
I'm sure it plays a role. Exactly how much it plays, I'm not sure. We want to look at every cost driver and figure out which ones are driving the costs the greatest. And I think you get into the permitting as being a big one, environmental. The sales tax is certainly a big one. And so we want to drill down into a lot of those as our primary focus.
Have you seen any aspect of the project that's being unveiled, and is there anything that you agree with?
So we haven't got to see the package yet. Has she shared with you?
She has shared with me.
Okay.
So I'm a little reluctant to give too much of it out until she releases it.
Well, it's being released right now.
Yes.
So, and the people who are covering it are there. So,
Okay.
I mean, is there anything that is, any element of it that you thought looked like a good idea?
Well, there's a lot of it that's troubling. Hazardous substance tax increase, which adds another, effectively another 2 to 3 cents to the cost of a gallon of gasoline, would give us an effective fuel tax of closer to 68 or 69 cents a gallon instead of the 66 that was mentioned earlier. Motor vehicle excise tax, I think, is going to be very concerning to individuals, 0.7%. That means on a vehicle with a value of $20,000, you're looking at an extra $140 a year to register your vehicle, which is something that was of huge concern to people. Exactly how the values are going to be calculated for the purpose of administering that motor vehicle excise tax has always been a controversial issue and have been concern for citizens around the state. I'm sure that'll be a concern to them as well.
So nothing then common ground?
Well, I think probably the only common ground in there is that we have maintenance that has to get done, and we have to figure out a way to do it. But I think we just have two different philosophies. Some people think that you can do it through efficiencies and good government. Other people think you just take more money to run bad government.
Okay, so point yous are the Transportation Committee. What sort of package and broad strokes would you guys put together?
So we will have that out when?
Soon. Our primary focus, as I said earlier, I think we need to spend the next 2 years drilling down into the cost drivers and figure out how to make our tax dollars go further. And we should make sure our tax dollars go further before we reach further into the taxpayer's pocket.
I mean, there's ideas around, John, there's ideas around liability issues for like the new bridge on the 520 because we've built a flawed structure that we're accepting liability on the bridge. That's a huge issue for us. It also goes to bonding on tolls. It goes to, we think there's some money to be left on the table through mitigation, how mitigation banks are working and if they're functioning correctly or not. We think there's money on the table from the sales tax. So there's a lot of different aspects that we think we can pick up 2 to 3 cents of the maintenance and operations needed.
I want to switch subjects. Governor Inslee testified before the Senate Environmental Committee this morning on his, I think it was Ranker's bill technically, but it's essentially an Inslee
His climate bill.
The setting up a task force to examine how greenhouse emissions can be trimmed in Washington State by 2020. How does your side of the aisle feel about that venture?
There's some really quick fixes, if I may, Richard,
Okay.
on this. There's some really quick fixes to it. Let's reduce congestion, and you'll have a lot smaller amount of emissions because your cars won't be on the road as long. They won't be sitting there idling, getting nowhere. Let's address the forest health issues in eastern Washington, where catastrophic fires have been emitting tremendous amount of carbon.
More than a coal plant.
Way more than a coal plant. In fact, there was a study done in, I think, in California, where a few years ago, where I think 4 fires were analyzed, and they figured the total of those was about 130,000 acres, and that put as much carbon into the atmosphere as 2 million cars per year on our highways. And how many millions of acres burned last year in the western United States? Can you imagine what difference we could make in the carbon in the atmosphere if we would change our management strategies, or lack of management strategies, in our forests in the eastern part of the state?
One, dealing with congestion is not like waving a magic wand and saying, congestion go away.
Oh, but we
That
do.
would take, major engineering.
No, it actually doesn't, John. If we go back and we look at what's causing the problem for Washington State today, it's jobs. All this is around jobs. If we can get people in Washington State, if you think about it, if you can take those 40% of the people that are leaving Lewis County to work and create manufacturing jobs in rural Washington, you get those people off the roads immediately. So if you do this by, one, you eliminate GMA that's failed, it's failed policy, and you give 90-day permits, and we have all these permits that are Department of Ecology of businesses that want to come to our state, and you give them certainty around their structure, by this summer, we could put 50,000 people to work, get them off the roads, and clear up congestion. It's because we keep patching symptoms that we never look at the cause. The cause for all the root problems that we're having in Olympia today is jobs, and we have to do something different. Also on the governor's plan, we live in one of the greenest states in the nation. I appreciate that he respects that, and I hope that he considers, the opportunity to classify hydro as green so we can compete in the West and give us a competitive advantage. If that's what he's looking at doing, we support that. It looks more like his bill he ran in Congress. So, yeah,
What
Brett.
message did you get from Kathy McMorris today?
Oh, it was great to see her. As you guys know, Kathy McMorris Rogers has moved up in the leadership chain. She's now number 3 in Congress for the Republicans. She came to talk to us about sequestration, which we like to call getting the bills paid in common Washington State terms. And she gave us an update on that and what's happening there. She also kind of let us understand that there's a lot of negotiations going on and that we need to be able to talk to these situations and make sure we don't have these same problems in our state, which we won't because we have a balanced budget.
Did you?
The bottom line of her message, though, is she saying get ready for the effects and start preparing for them in your budgets?
She said that John Boehner is going to the Hill every day for multiple hour sessions with the president, and that no one wants to see a catastrophic failure in government, and we do not want to, they want to be able to come to a conclusion that would solve the problem, and Boehner's willing to work as hard as it takes and as long as it takes to get it done. He literally goes every day. That's the message we got.
So you feel like
They'll
you
solve the
don't have to
problem.
worry anymore?
It's interesting right now. I'm worried about my own jobs, my own budget, and my own people, so
It affects your budget.
it does. And so one of the things, it affects him on
How
his,
much more does it worry you about your budget, having heard from her?
the Medicaid reimbursement and the issues around TANF and all the federal issues. It worries me a great deal, but major cuts will go to the military. That probably impacts Joint Base Lewis McChord and some of our provisions there. I think that will come to resolution.
Did she say Medicaid is one of the things that would be affected?
No, she said it wouldn't. The entitlements would be held solid. I heard that from her. Their goal is to find other opportunities for this. And they have a 25-year plan a 10-year plan to bring it to a balanced budget that they're trying to get the president to buy into.
Okay,
Thank you.
I don't know if I stole her thunder. You might want to talk to her.
going back to Inslee and carbon emissions, he painted a portrait of this is costing this, carbon emissions is costing the state billions of dollars. We got to get ahead of the speeding train, essentially saying this is a really big problem. Do you agree with them or disagree with them on
I personally disagree. It's up to them to say how they feel. Washington State's carbon emissions is one of the lowest footprints besides Maine in the nation. I don't necessarily buy into the whole concept that what Washington State does is impacting the world. We like to think we're world leaders, but I'm sorry, China's emissions are still the big dog on the block. India's the big dog on the block. When we can't even manage our forests and our carbon emissions through our natural resource management and sequestration of CO2. Sequestration, by the way, of CO2, not of dollars.
Follow that?
So when this table is made of wood, so it's made of carbon. And if this table never burns, it never releases its carbon. It is sequestered. So when you grow a tree absorbs carbon. It's called a carbon sink. And it absorbs carbon and it pulls it out of the atmosphere. And as that tree gets bigger, it absorbs more and more until it reaches a productive life that it stops absorbing, and then someone like Ed comes in and then they harvest the tree and they build something out of it, and that is sequestered forever. If you burn that tree up, every ounce of carbon that tree is sequestered goes into a thermal reaction into the atmosphere and becomes a carbon release. And what he was saying is because of our forest fires last year, we're releasing a lot more carbon through our forest fires than we ever have through our industrial activities.
Forest fires are sort of, almost not act of God, but they're things you really can't.
We can
legally
prevent
declare
them from
you
being,
can't.
we can
Smoking
prevent them
says
from
so.
being, we can prevent them from being catastrophic fires. And just let me give you a little bit of background. I'm a forester by trade. I've been through 2 different universities in forestry. I've studied fire and wildfire management at the University of Idaho, and I fought wildfire. I fought fire for the Idaho Department of Lands. So I understand the role of fire in our ecology. The problem is that when we excluded fire and didn't replace the exclusion of fire with management, we've now excluded management as well. What that's done is that's allowed for greater fuel buildups to occur in our forests. It has also allowed for greater stems per acre in our forests. And on the east side, where water is your limiting factor, when you have too many stems competing for a very scarce resource, they all get stressed. What happens when those trees get stressed is they are no longer able to fend off bug attacks. Then the bugs proliferate in those stands, finish off those trees, so now you have standing dead fuel. And that's when a fire gets ignited. You cannot control it anymore, and it turns into a catastrophic wildfire and turns into tens of thousands of acres. If we would go in and either use prescribed fire to manage those forests, or we would go in and remove some of the excess stems, we could keep our forests in a healthy condition, reduce the amount of carbon that's released during these catastrophic wildfires, protect our salmon and fish and wildlife habitat, and we could actually bring jobs back into rural Washington through investment in cellulosic ethanol if we had some certainty that we were going to be able to get those fuels off our state and federal forests.
And we have a bill, by the way. It's called the Natural Resource Carbon Sequestration Bill. It is Bruce Chandler's bill. So you guys can look at that in more detail.
And then what we would end up is we would end up with less carbon emissions, and we would have more benefit. We would be able to put those carbon emissions to beneficial use by fueling our industry or fueling our automobiles.
Let me try this from one last angle. Would you actively oppose this bill?
We haven't seen enough of the bill over in the House to understand it. We haven't had a hearing. A lot of it would depend on what the language says, but right now, just saying that carbon is bad doesn't really do anything.
What do you
Brad?
guys,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I understood.
And then Rachel.
Oh, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Okay.
The thrust of the bill was the state has carbon
Right.
emission reduction targets.
Right.
And this bill would ask the 5 corners, or representatives of the 5 corners,
To sit down and meet.
to sort of systematically look through and find
Common ground.
strategies
Yeah.
and common ground, but also look for what's a
But did you-
cost-effective way to meet those goals. So what's to oppose in that?
So I don't oppose the concept, but did you read the intro?
I think I did.
Okay. So there's a a political statement in the intro of the bill.
Okay.
And, I read Apollo's Fire. He repeated it in the intro of the bill. It's one of those things for me. We appreciate the concept. We will be engaged and involved. We have opinions on it. We think we can help resolve some of the carbon issues through different managements than maybe they would think of. So yeah, we'll be involved.
Okay.
So separate topic, what do you guys think about the payday lending bill that's being debated on the Senate floor right now? It's the first change since.
Oh, is that the increase in the rate?
Mhm.
Okay, I don't know.
Okay. Fair answer.
Yeah.
I mean, you just haven't looked at it yet?
No, and I don't think it's been heard in the House yet, has it? Everybody on my team's going, no.
But just the general idea
Has
of
it been heard in
making a
the House?
change to the
I think they were gonna
reforms.
vote it out of committee today.
Okay. So I will, as soon as I can review it, I'll get back to you.
I'd just like to make a comment. These guys are really from the more urban areas than I am. When we talk about gas tax and stuff, my district, the 9th district, if you add up Connecticut and Rhode Island together, that's the 9th district. I have folks who drive an hour for groceries, for milk. And we're gonna hang another gas tax on these poor folks? I mean, I know Richard talks a lot about lack of jobs, but my folks are driving a long way for basics, for medical, to go to school, for groceries, and we're gonna hang more gas tax on them? I'm sorry. That's a tough sell in the rural areas of the state. I will and if we hang it on diesel, man, it cost me $700 to fill my tractor for a day, to run a day, to farm. $700 a day. So let's be careful when we start talking about gas taxes and whatnot. I just sorry, didn't
No,
mean to jump
this
in
is
there.
good.
And even though yours is off-road diesel, you're talking about putting in your tractor, the hazardous substance tax increase
Yep.
would drive up your costs.
Yep. So
And he feeds us, by the way. He's a wheat farmer, so we need him. So it does impact us. I'm sure you guys want to go to the Democrat press conference on the gas tax. I appreciate you guys coming out. And also, the senators will be here next time, and they do apologize. They did not expect the debate to go so long today.
Thank you.
Thank you.